Welcome back to the Happily Different podcast, where we unpack the interesting and unorthodox ways people approach their businesses and their lives. The mission of this show is to learn as much as we can from the people who weren't afraid to go their own way. My name is Ryan Jaskowitz, and I'm your host as well as CEO of 12.5 Capital, a non-bank finance company helping companies accelerate the progress they are trying to make in their businesses and their lives. We have a great guest and a good friend of mine with us today. This guest and I joined the commercial finance industry in literally the same month back in 2006. So we've been through a lot together, which is why it'll be fun to pick his brain on today's topic. We don't typically have a specific focus for this show, but today's a tiny bit different. We all know that life can kind of hand us some pretty difficult hands in life, whether it be personally, professionally, or otherwise. And our guest was handed a very difficult hand in at least his business life over the past couple of years. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the details of it, but more on the impact it had on him personally and how he navigated those waters. Today's guest is a father, a husband, I think a huge fan of everything Pittsburgh, and most recently the co-owner of a finance company that had a super successful exit to a bank. He's quite the active member of our industry, having been named to a 40 under 40 list in the commercial finance space. He's been the president of the Turnaround Management Association and on the executive committee of the Secured Finance Network. Rob Meyers, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pretty good intro, dude. You've done that before.
I've done it once or twice now. Okay, as we jump in here, as I mentioned, I've known Rob for almost. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I've known him for almost 20 years now, maybe 16, 17 years now, and I somehow learned something new in my research. Well, if it's true, is it true that you were once an offensive lineman for the University of Chicago? Is that?
We did. We didn't just study there. We actually played football there. From time to time.
How did I not know this? Tell me about this.
So the good high school football player. But
where was high school again?
Good. Yeah, good. So Western Pennsylvania. Grew up just outside of Pittsburgh. My high school was North Catholic High School in downtown Pittsburgh on a place called Troy Hill, overlooks Heinz Field. And then we kind of lived 20, 25 minutes outside of there. When I was looking at where to go to college, the most memorable meeting was Cam Cameron was the head coach of Indiana at the time. And my dad was alumni there. My grandfather went there. They're all from Fort Wayne. And my grandfather's got a really cool story. I was born on his 70th birthday for another memory. But I sat down with him and, I did the day on campus and visit and cool stuff. And you see the weight room and your name's on it. And it's just like, you feel like you've actually made it in life. At least if you're a football guy. But he sat down and said, no offense, you're 6'3.5", Western Pennsylvania, big boy. I got a bunch of 6'5" and 6'6", right? He goes, you can come here and you'll graduate with an MBA from Kelly in 5 years. And if you're lucky, you'll redshirt for sure. And maybe you play as a fifth year. And so do you really want to spend your next 5 years with football as a full-time job? And he said, if I were you, it sounds like you got into a couple schools. You should probably go there instead. And it was the best advice I've ever gotten in my entire life in regarding to sports. And then it narrowed my focus to Hopkins and a few other places that had Division III football. And when I joined the University of Chicago, I don't think I'll ever forgive them for this, but it was supposed to just be a fall sport. But sure enough, that first year they decided to introduce spring ball into Division III sports in 2012. And I've been bitter ever since. But in high school, when you play in front of thousands of people, when you go to college and everyone in the stands is actually your teammates' parents, because no one cares if their kid is playing football at the University of Chicago. Didn't quite have the same drive for the rest of it. Exactly right. But yes, I was a left tackle and a left guard for a little bit for the University of Chicago football team.
Awesome. How many years? Yeah.
3 years.
Appendix ended it?
Second year, I never got injured in high school. Second year, a helmet chipped off a piece of my kneecap. So that took me out for kind of 4 or 6 weeks. And then senior year, my appendix, which has got some funny stories from buddies of mine that know each other, but kind of partially started going. Went to the student care facility, which was mistake number 2, right? You should actually go to the ER. And they let me sit there for 24 hours.
Wow.
and nearly ruptured by the time they were done. But that was my I don't care enough. I need to go drink and do some other stuff instead.
Yeah. Let's be done. Let's be done with this. I just thought it was hilarious that I had no idea over our friendship over the last 20 years that you were an offensive lineman. So that's pretty cool. You talked about growing up in Pennsylvania. I'm curious to know, this is, as I look at this question, it's like a almost confusing question to read. I'm curious how your upbringing in Pennsylvania shaped you in a way that someone who didn't grow up there wouldn't understand.
I compare Pittsburgh and Chicago are very similar. A lot of our parents were blue collar workers, and then their dream was to have their kids be white collar workers. And where you go to Los Angeles or Dallas or Miami, if you're rich, you know it. Your boots, your jeans, your cars, they tell you, they name drop a lot of places. In Western Pennsylvania, no one cares, right? They don't care how much money, they don't care about any of that stuff, right? They're just generally quality people. You get a hard time no matter who you are. Freshman, sophomore year, you're going to get bullied a little bit. And, you're going to do a nice version of that to the next group after you, right? Because everyone grew up tough, man. Don't get me wrong. There's some houses on the hills with views, but we don't have, it's funny. I wonder if when we moved to Pittsburgh in 1994, if there was even $1 million house in the entire Western Pennsylvania. I bet there probably wasn't, right? That just wasn't a thing. That was, one was that flashy, right? And even to this day, you asked me how it impacted me. I mean, my dad's worked for the same company for 44 years. And every time he got promoted, we moved. So he met my mom in Chattanooga, Tennessee. My mom was one of 9. She at the time worked 3 jobs, electrician, worked for a drywall company, and I forget the third one. He gets promoted. I'm born in Columbus, Ohio after they marry. He gets promoted when I was 1 year old. I live outside Detroit, a place called Farmington Hills. So my dad's selling into the big automotive companies. Ironically, one of the investors in Republic, that's where we meet him. And then fast forward to when I was 10, 1994, we moved to Pittsburgh, and I stay there until I'm 18, until I come here for college. But to me, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, they're all very similar people, and they all very similar cultures. And it's a value system, right? Most people in that part go to church on Sundays through one version or another. Most people have a sense of morality that, like I said, I'm not, it just, I think there's a core foundation of what it means to be from Western Pennsylvania. When you meet people from there, they're like it, right? Listen, we might say stupid stuff. We might say yins. I mean, we say words, we whoosh our clothes, and no one has any idea what the hell we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
But at its core, they're just good people. Yeah. And I mean, obviously now the city is wildly successful with engineering and healthcare and finance. But when I was there was a lot of steel, right? Yeah. That's what my dad's business was. And now they don't make steel anywhere in Western Pennsylvania anymore.
So, okay. So moving on a little bit, you said your dad, what did your dad do mom and dad do for a living?
So my mom, once, she had me, and then I have a younger sister who's 2.5 years younger, stayed home, right? And she volunteered at all of our games. She always ran the concession stand. She always had a big giant Tahoe until I totaled it when I was 16 years old. Took Gatorades and waters to everything you could possibly imagine. That was her thing. And she volunteered at the church, and we have a fish fry, and she just loved it. Yeah. And then my dad was in the steel business. And so if you ever look at a stadium or a building, they have these big giant steel studs. And so his firm, which he worked forever, and it was bought twice, is the largest steel stud manufacturer in the country. They do $2 billion of steel studs, which is what, again, at its core, Pittsburgh was for a very long time. Yeah,
steel. Yeah, it's funny.
3 rivers, floating down the river, you get to the Ohio, you can get to the away it goes, right? That's how the country is connected.
Yeah. I co-sign that idea that Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and even as you creep into Illinois, Indiana, all that, very similar people. I will say, having met people from the other side of Pennsylvania, I don't think that's the same outlook. Would you agree on that?
I try to categorize Pittsburgh as part of the Midwest, and my wife gets offended being from Chicago, because to her, Pittsburgh just can't possibly be because Pennsylvania touches the ocean, basically.
Right.
And so
yeah.
in her mind, like, it's not possible. But Pittsburgh's 6 hours away from Philadelphia. And I will tell you, in Pennsylvania, and this isn't a political conversation, but you're not allowed to be extreme.
Yeah.
You don't just wrongly identify one way or another to the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
You're allowed to have different views on abortion, gun control, public schools, Catholic schools. It don't matter. Yeah. Right? You don't really have extremes. And so then it's funny. Yeah. People then describe Pittsburgh as like, there's Pittsburgh, there's Philadelphia, and there's Alabama in the middle, right? Which is not how I would describe Pennsylvania. Yeah. But to your point, it is very different. And the capital of Pennsylvania is in the middle of it. Yeah, right. Which is very far away from Pittsburgh and Philly, right? And Philly, if I didn't like the place, let's just say for the moment I do, but you call it a suburb of New York, right? Right,
exactly.
And that's why it is going to have a different feel. It's going to have a different speed, and it's going to have a different, connectivity. If you think about, just how people have come up over hundreds of years, it's largely been a geographic focus of how you were born and developed. And you had to go through a lot of mountains to get from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, but it's an hour and a half train ride from Philly to New York. So
no question. So you found your way from Pittsburgh to Chicago through University of Chicago. That was your first move to that area.
Correct.
And we're going to skip through a bunch of your career at this point because that would be a much longer conversation. But needless to say,
I was a chief janitor. A couple other things along the way.
Yeah, a couple of things along the way. We'll touch on some of those other things a little later. But you in 2006 you enter this industry. You go gangbusters at your role as a salesperson. You grow. You eventually buy into a company, right? Is that fair to say? Okay. Yeah. So this is where we're going to shift a little bit the conversation. So Rob's in the commercial finance industry. He's now an owner in this industry, which is its own different ball game, as you enter that space. So I'm going to give the audience a Cliff Notes version of the challenge you guys ran into, and then you can jump in with correcting any details. Again, most of this is a matter of public record. We're not really going to get into the details because that's not what interests me. But just to be clear, these are not all the details. Your company, I think it's important for my audience to know that maybe isn't in our space. Your company is known as a gold standard in our industry, right? Like you guys are,
appreciate that.
You guys have grown in a very thoughtful way. You guys have a great portfolio. You have great people. And so the reason I bring that up is after earning that reputation, you guys had a disgruntled borrower, I'll say, that slapped you guys with a pretty substantial lawsuit. And without getting into the merits or lack thereof, this borrower actually won a $24 million judgment against your company. Did I get that right?
So technically the trustee,
I'm sorry. Yes.
On behalf of the bankruptcy estate of a business that he happened to own, was awarded through a judge's opinion, plus or minus 17 million. He, as the individual that used to own the business, was awarded about 1 million. But then you go into pre-judgment, post-judgment interest plus lawyer fees. And if you put that whole bucket together, it would have been to the tune of $25 million.
Crazy. So for our listeners who may not be in this space, I mean, I remember when you told me this, I was dumbfounded. I was awestruck in the worst way, right? I couldn't believe it. And just thinking for any of our listeners in their business, getting slapped with a lawsuit like this, and then now not just the lawsuit and having to fight it and having to do those things, but now effectively 25 million, you're being told, whoever it's going to, but we have to pay, right? And obviously, a lot happened afterwards, but take me back to that moment. Take me to the moment the judgment was levied and what your mind state was like.
Sure. Slight change. It wasn't a judgment.
Okay. There we go.
Judgments come later. This case, because of the size and the gravity of it, it was a judge's opinion that you then have other things that happen that then eventually becomes a judgment if you don't pay, right?
Right.
The judgment is what a lien would be over your business, just from a technical standpoint.
Yeah.
We never got a judgment in the trustee portion of the case, but let's pause.
Yeah. The judge said, this is what you owe, or the opinion was, this is what you owe. Yeah. I want to take me back to when you heard that.
Yeah.
When you heard that news.
So I think what's really important before I tell you the next bit is Ryan described me buying this business in 2016. What's the most interesting part of this story is that the loan was before I owned the company. And so there is that first moment of fault that obviously creeps in. And in this case, I wasn't there. I didn't make any of the decisions, but I did buy a company in our space and bought out another founder and a group of investors with not only my money, my family's money, and a family friend's money. But I knew at the time that this loan had already gone under. And it was in bankruptcy court. And the important part of this is the inputs I was getting said this wasn't something I should really spend my time on. Okay. That's 2016. This didn't go to trial until the summer of 2021.
Got it.
That period of time, there was discovery and all kinds of things. And I always just went, well, I don't need to listen to it, right? I don't need to listen to it. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand it. I didn't take any time to learn about it, right? Now, during that period of time, we bought another finance company, added multiple products, expanded our geography, and all the things that Ryan says about the reputation. That's where I focused all my efforts and time. People, business. So now, December 23rd of 2021, so 6 months after trial, that whole 6 months, there were some settlement conversations potentially going on to see like, hey, are we going to wait around for the judge? Should we do something else instead? But, the sides were very far apart. So on my birthday is when this 142-page judge's opinion came out.
Ouch.
But what's incredibly important is I didn't find out about it that day. I didn't find out about it until the 26th of December. My business partner, forever I will owe an incredible debt, knew I was a father with my parents at home who were also investors with young kids, and he made the decision he didn't want to ruin my Christmas.
Incredible.
Because he knew every moment after that, and he said it was the hardest decision he ever made in life was not telling me at that day.
Right.
But he made a decision knowing that on the 26th, nothing was going to change. And so he spent Christmas, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day trying to negotiate, right? Then we all have to get together. But I will tell you that moment, my parents were leaving and I didn't say goodbye because I was up here reading 142 pages.
Right.
Anger is the first time you read it. Disbelief is the second time. The third time you read it, you start getting into blame and fault.
Okay.
But those emotions of just absolute, this is business ending, are things that you can never possibly understand. What I can just characterize is I have a reflection notebook. And I took my temperature pretty much every day and sometimes multiple times a day during those first 6 weeks, we'll call it. But again, I wasn't there when it happened. That doesn't mean I could have done a bunch of things differently. And I think I just want to draw that very clear distinction. But a year later, my birthday now is always going to have this memory for me. And
Yeah,
so whether
for sure.
I want to forget this lawsuit for the rest of my life, every year on my birthday, I'm going to wake up in the morning and check my email, and that sucks. So it'll have a lasting impression forever.
Well, we're getting older, so maybe some of those brain cells will go, and it'll.
So I
fade
just need
bit.
like a 0.002% of Alzheimer's is what you're telling me to get me through life.
It. That's all we're looking for here. That's all we're looking for. So you went from anger to disbelief to fault, which we can talk a little bit about because that can get insidious itself. But how long did it take you? To me, that's shock, right? All of those things are shock in some
100%.
respect. How long did it take you to go from shock to problem solving, and what did that transition look like?
I bet 45 minutes.
Okay, I like it. I would have been the same way. I think.
Because I had to absorb the magnitude of it, and I think you make active choices in life. Could have given up. No one would have blamed me. I could have gone out and just started blaming other people and tried to figure out what my remedies were. But I immediately went into, we've worked too hard to build this. There's a solution to every problem I've ever come across in my life. Whether that problem is expensive or not is different. And I knew Stuart and I together, right? That he had 3 days of immense pain where I was coming into it with a fresh mind. And then it became, well, what's next?
Right.
And that's a really important part. But the getting there is I very clearly made a decision, probably with a few swear words that we won't use on this podcast, of that's not how this story is going to end. I don't know how this story is going to end, but I'm not done. Right.
But not like
We've
this.
done too much. We have too many good people. I think we've built the best business. I think what this thing could be worth in 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years is incredible. Fuck it. Let's dive in and see where we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we also had nothing to lose too, which is interesting.
Right.
Because you already killed us. It's a different motivation. Like there was no preservation of, there was no loss aversion. The loss, it was over.
It was over. Yeah. You had dealt with it at that point, which is a good lesson for people. It's a good lesson that like sometimes the things you fear the most when they're there, it's like, okay, well that's done now. Band-Aids off. Let's get to work. And I think you make a good point, though. Not everyone responds that way. Some people respond with crawling under the table, and that's not always their fault. Like it's just people don't have to deal with it.
Some people drown themselves in bourbon. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of what you do. And every morning I was on a Peloton. And there were some days where I just needed to take a 15-minute walk around the block in snow, in negative 40-degree weather. I didn't care. But what was surreal in that 6 weeks, and this was the part you find out how much what an empty tank actually means, is nearly every day for the best part of 6 weeks, I would wake up, I would work out, I would have breakfast with my family, I would remind myself, and my wife would remind me that when we were getting married, we picked a bridge that if this whole entrepreneurial thing didn't work out, we'd at least have a beautiful view of Lake Michigan because we could go back there one day, right? Yeah. We never thought we had arrived. We always knew that this is fleeting and this could be taken away.
Totally.
And I think that's true of every entrepreneur in the history of the world, whether you do something wrong or you don't, a pandemic, you name the thing we've all experienced. And that's also probably, this was December of 21. We were 18 months into the pandemic, and I hadn't even recovered from that yet.
Yeah, right. So you have that on top of it.
My tank's gone. And every day I would wake up, I would start working, we'd start working on deals, right? I had 3 goals: lose no people, lose no clients, grow the business.
Yeah.
No matter what was going to happen the rest of the day, every day I reminded myself that was what I needed to do.
Right.
And every day at about 1 o'clock, this case would come into my day and ruin it. Because we'd have to get on the phone with a lawyer, or I'd have to get on the phone with multiple lawyers, or I'd have to get on the phone with an investor. I'd have to get on the phone with Wells Fargo, who was our senior debt provider, or you name it.
Yeah.
Every single day, if I didn't start early and I didn't start fresh, my day was going to get taken away from me. And there was nothing I could do because I was along for the ride.
There's two things that I think people need to take from that if they didn't take it from you saying it. Number one is I think people fail to realize, and a lot of people know I do a lot of running and exercising and things like that. I think people fail to realize because it seems too easy, too simple, which is that exercise every day has this incredible way of pulling you out of depression. Real, like actually 100%. The grip of this is terrible. Just moving your body makes a huge difference. And in addition, that idea of being completely fried by the end, by 1 o'clock or at 1 o'clock where it would start, right? By starting your morning and saying, I'm sticking to these 3 things or whatever it is. And you're not going to steal my morning or people can choose whatever they want for that example. But you said, this is mine. I'm not scheduling anything with the negative in this period. 1 o'clock ruined my day. That's fine. But from 6 to 1 or whatever it is, it's my day. And having been through some stuff myself, I know that feeling at 5:30, 6 o'clock when literally you have nothing left in your brain. And it's kind of tough for your family too, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what also is setting expectations at home. My wife knew what I was going through, right? Yeah. And I asked her about this and she goes, one of her biggest takeaways is the value of being a talker and the value of being a listener and how I was vulnerable during those 6 weeks, right? If you talked to me, I would tell you what was going on. I wouldn't tell you it was good. I wouldn't tell you we necessarily had it all figured out. I mean, you and I met for a coffee during that. And I remember some of the anger you had, right? Which doesn't probably fit on a podcast. Yeah. But fundamentally, like I told my friends about what was going on. I told my business partner
probably for the first time in your life, huh?
100%. Because it's like works, blah, 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 right? And people see me in awards and speaking. And it's just, to me, that's all like, I don't care. Right. Like, it's great. It's super meaningful and I should, but like it was it's funny. My wife, we went and found a note from one of my really, really, really good buddies and he gave me, 6 weeks later when we settled, he gave me 2 bottles of High West, 1 bourbon and 1 rye, 2 cigars. And he wrote me a little note and he said, congrats, buddy. Here's hoping this is the last time we celebrate settling a lawsuit. But we would not have had that experience had he not known what was going on. Right. Right. And I texted 9 or 10 or 12 of my friends and said, hey, I just want you to know this is everywhere. You probably don't see it because you might not be in our industry, but I'm not going to be as good of a friend for the next 2 or 3 months. But like it's all fucked. Right. And I just don't know any other way to share with it. But it's interesting in this, you haven't asked me this, but the few people that actually reached out to me and I asked people later, why didn't they call? And by the way, some people did. And those people are forever grateful. Sure. And they did have really good advice along the way. And many of them run and own finance companies just like you and I do. But I asked people later and they're like, we just didn't think you wanted to hear from us, or we didn't think you wanted to talk about it, or you go on down the list. But if I reached out, they were happy to be a resource. And I think that just goes back to you do have to take initiative even in your moments of the worst, because I fielded hundreds of phone calls about that lawsuit and hundreds of emails about it. Just like the good times, in those moments, every lawyer in the country featured it and emailed it to everyone. So operating under this, no one's going to know, or we're going to hide it, or we're going to be defensive, was not part of the strategy. But I thought that was having people around me that knew what was going on made it easier in some ways for me to bear, because with my wife knew, at dinner, I was stepping away to take phone calls for the first time in my professional career because it was Bailey related.
Yeah. Right. And so when I think about that, there's a couple of things I take from what you just said. And the first and foremost that I want to cover is like, the idea of your partner in life, whatever that is, whoever that is, and I'm referencing your wife here, the impact that person can have on your day-to-day stability in such a tough situation like this is insane. I can't imagine going through it alone. Number one, that would have been terrible. Can't imagine going through it with a partner who doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. And then I also and three, I couldn't imagine going through something like this without someone who can look you in the eyes and go, if we end up in a tent somewhere, we're good. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? There's such confidence in that, hearing from that person going, I don't need all this stuff. This was fun, but as long as we're good, I'm good. Right. That's kind of the feeling you got, right?
And her words were very simple. It's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And at times, I didn't need to hear that. And other days I needed to hear it more than I probably realized. Mm-hmm. Because it's interesting. No one understood what I was fully going through. No one actually understood the gravity of what was happening, but that didn't matter. Mm-mm. They knew it mattered to me. They knew it mattered to my family. They knew it mattered to our business, and they knew it was bad. Yeah. And that's actually enough, right? Mm-hmm. And also was how we decided to deal with it. Mm-hmm. My business partner and I were both saying it's someone else's fault isn't us. And it isn't truthful. And so what we did, and I know Ryan was at both of them, is I decided that, I had a choice to either be a miserable curmudgeon, of which no one would blame me.
No one would fault you.
There's not a single person in the world that would ever blame me for it.
Right. Or
just be who I am. Right. And I decided that, as awful as it was to me, that I didn't want it to happen to anyone else ever again. Mm-hmm. And so we did a presentation to 350 people at one of our industry conferences. And then I took 45 to 50 of, kind of CEOs and presidents of our industry and had another kind of discussion around it. And it wasn't, it was, these are all the things that we did wrong. These are the things we learned from it. These are the things we could have done differently. This is the history of lender liability in Texas, of which I had no idea, right? And that's the matter Ryan's talking about. Like, I didn't grow up in a period at which this was a risk. Mm-hmm. And now, oh my God, is it ever, right? And if my only mission alone is educating people on a potential risk that they didn't know existed, then I've left this world better than I came to it. And even if the story had turned out differently, I still would have been so proud. Right. Because we didn't lose any people.
Right.
And that is, I cannot tell you. And it's why, and they hear me all say this, but I feel like I have such a debt to our business.
Well, and I want to talk about that a little bit, because you manage a lot of people and you've done so at a high level for a long time. How did you manage those employee relationships tactically while this was all happening?
So I asked one of my senior leaders, and she goes, you had such a good poker face. And she goes, you didn't speak in absolutes, and you instilled enough confidence without being overconfident that it was going to be okay. You told us you didn't have it necessarily figured out, but you told us you had a pretty good, again, you talk about phone calls you make in your life. Yeah. On the 26th of December, 27th of December, I called my family friend and said, hey, I need $5 million and I need to go to war. And within 5 seconds, he said, here you go. Wow. And so I was able to walk in knowing and speak to my business that I didn't know the outcome. I didn't know how it was going to go. I had no idea if that was ever going to be enough. I didn't know what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. But I knew I had a rock walking in. And that confidence, I was able to say, like, listen, I don't know if it's going X. I don't know if it's going Y. But what I can tell you, today we're good, right? And today we can focus on what we need to do, right? Yep. Yeah, we've got more hearings and more this and more that. But all of the stakeholders, and there were 3 owners, there was a senior debt provider and a junior debt provider, all of them were there for us and supported us. And it's because, and I bet if you ask them, because we do what we say we're going to do. And when there's a problem, we tell them about it. They didn't read about that in a newspaper. They didn't read about that any other way. They heard about it from us. And more importantly, they heard about it that we'd already had a solution.
Right.
And during periods of uncertainty, having as much of a plan, whether it's duct tape or it's actually built out of steel, I don't care.
Yeah.
But coming with solutions to people you need help from is so much better than coming to, here's my giant pile of shit, can you help me? And that confidence is what everyone saw from us. And that's why they said, you guys have built a nice business. I know you'll get past this. And so I want to stay. Right.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, every single recruiter, not everyone, the vast majority of recruiters sent emails to my staff trying to pull them away.
Wow.
Saying Republic's dead, it's over, you name it, right?
Yeah.
But our industry, the people that run and own our businesses, with the exception of a few calls, if you need something, call me. None of the people in our industry went after me because they all know the same thing could have happened to them. Right. And that's why I felt it as a debt to re-educate and to just explain what happened as best I could.
Yeah.
And listen, we've done when you own a business, something's going to happen. Whether it's a law in our business, whether it's a bad debt, whether it's a fraud, whether it's an employee issue, or whether it's a massive lender's liability lawsuit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't get through this business without learning lessons. And I think the team around you matters so much in those moments, right? And people trusted us that we would get through it and get to the other side. And that's why, I always tell them, all of you have a choice to work somewhere else. Not just today, but every day. Because I truly believe that, because we have a killer team of people.
Right.
And so to me, every day I have to continue to prove myself that this was worth them taking the leap of faith they did over those 6 weeks.
It's amazing. You talked about lessons. Were there any, and you might have mentioned one just now, so I don't want to, if that's the case, you can just kind of repeat it, but were there any lessons in leadership that you learned in the process that you didn't know prior?
Not speaking in absolutes.
Yeah. That's what I was going to pull from your prior, what you said, where it's this idea of not being completely ambiguous, but not being so concrete when everyone feels like the ground is shaking and you're going, no, everything's fine. No, everything's not fine, but here's how we're going to dock the boat, so to speak. That to me, that is something that I pulled from what you said, where I've been through some of these things, not like yours, but I've been through my own issues as a company.
No one in the world ever goes through what I went through.
Nothing's as bad as this one.
Misery does not love company in lawsuits.
No. But it is funny that it had, before that point, you think, oh, I need to go to my team and go to everyone and say, this is what we're doing. Everything's fine. I've got it figured out. That's what your mind tells you to say. But it's not until you're sort of vulnerable. I mean, you have to be a leader, of course. That's why you are in the role you're in. But being open and letting them know, yes, I also see how bad it is. But the difference between me and maybe somebody else is I see how bad it is and I'm still willing to attack it. I think is really interesting from a leadership perspective, and something I didn't know before going through some challenges myself.
And I'll tell you, as a leader, you have to be what people need at that time. Yeah. But more importantly, you need to be what they need in the future, whether they know it or not. And it's really hard. I don't think leadership is for everyone. Management is very different, right? But you give a lot of your, as a servant or a values-based, or as I would say, a good leader, you're given little chunks of yourself during a lot of that process. And
pounds of flesh for sure.
And if you don't refill it, right? Like I played golf this morning. Golf is my happy place, right? Yeah. And this thing wasn't over when we got to the summers and stuff, but I'll wake up at 6 a.m. I'll go walk 18 holes. I'll wake up at 5 actually, something, and go walk 18 holes of golf and be home by 9:30 or 10. And like just outside, and again, sometimes I'll play by myself and I'll have like a golf playlist in of Spotify. And like, to me, and even when I go back, like if I don't go outside into fresh air and sunlight, I notice a very different ability for me to take stuff from other people. Yeah. And some days I just turn my phone off at 5:30 because I need a break because I'm burned out. And I think recognizing burnout is one of the big leadership lessons I took from it. Right. I remember December of 2020. I've never been so tired in my entire life. And so I just took the last 2 weeks of the year off because I'd given everything I had. And if I didn't stop, I wouldn't be there for people in January.
I'm with you. I co-sign all of this. I think it's, how do I say this? It feels, when you're a leader or when you own a company, I'm going to focus on leader. When you're a leader and you are going through a challenge and you're going through a tough time, like let's say you were going through, people assume there's this infinite resource that you have that you can draw on. And it's not, it's finite. Every day it's finite. And so the challenge I see is, for me, I'll speak for myself. Some of those things, like maybe golfing, it's not golfing for me, but maybe it's running or something else. If you were better at golfing, you'd like golfing. Probably. In those moments though, they feel indulgent, right? Because you're like, everything I'm working on is on fire over here. And I should be doing everything I can to put it out. But what we fail to realize is, unless we refill the cup, like you're talking about, in whatever way that is for you, you can't fight that fire because it's a finite resource that you have to give back. And that recognizing the burnout of not just yourself, which I think is really interesting, but of the team and people on your team, I think is a huge lesson you're probably taking with you after this.
Big time. And I think probably the hardest part of leadership, and I think this gets displayed a lot of different ways from people, but it is interesting how little we thank or appreciate leaders. We have incredible expectations of them, but very rarely do you actually get a thank you or a job well done once you've reached that role. People kind of just assume he obviously knows he's great, or she obviously knows he's great because she runs the business. So who gives a shit? Right. But it's interesting. That's one of the self-serving principles of leadership that I think comes up a lot. Is if you're doing it for your own glory or you're doing it for your own ego, in my opinion, you don't survive those kind of business events that I had, because it's the wrong reason. Right. It's the same. It's funny. At University of Chicago, I was a biology major. Hopefully you knew that.
I did not.
Biology major that played football. That's in fine. It's going to take a while. It all comes together. We don't have that many hours. What I will tell you is my last class was economics and medicine. And listen, I got all the way through. But as a kid, I wanted to go in to be a doctor for patient care. But this was maybe my first epiphany. At 20, 21, I was doing it for the money. And I didn't think that was a good enough reason to be a neurosurgeon. Right. And I spent my summers in a lab in the University of Chicago Hospital, the neurology department. And I was like, maybe I need to just pause this medicine thing and kind of see what's out there. Right. And then I got lucky and found a business that sent me to blah, blah, blah. But it was a moment where, I had a really good perspective and a good understanding of what mattered to me. Right. And I think that's what I took a lot out of this was I had to make very active choices. Right. Now I'm a huge skeptic of everything, maybe too much. Right. But if you tell me you know something, or you make an assumption, I'm going to ask you far more follow-up questions than I ever would have. Right. Yeah. And, a lot of the time I find out that it's just bullshit. Right. People have a habit of, particularly some that speak overconfidently. Often
it's almost a rule. It's almost a rule. It's almost a rule now. And it's funny how, unfortunately you can't even listen to podcasts to gain all the wisdom you need in life. You just kind of need to go through life, unfortunately. But it is a rule that I feel like in my life, the more overconfident you are, the more full of shit you definitely are. And it's funny you say this, because this is my next question. This thing you just went through, it has such an impact on philosophy of business and life. But how do you prevent, or can you prevent yourself from becoming jaded, I guess?
So I don't know if everyone can prevent themselves from being jaded. Yeah. There was absolutely times I've heard every single leader and manager in the world make a joke that they wish they just managed robots. Right? Because sometimes the people side of the business is exhausting. Right? Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah.
And even I can get worn out.
Right.
And so when you then switch over to me today, well, the magnitude of a decision doesn't all get treated the same, right?
Yeah.
I have people around each table that now have different backgrounds and different experiences and different expertise than we ever had before.
Yeah.
And I don't let one person do anything anymore when it has gravitas or significance or magnitude, right?
Right.
One of the first things is now, if we have a troubled client, no one person can go off and have an emotional response.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
We make everyone, whether it's 3 of us, 4 of us, and a lawyer on those calls to understand what's happening and understand what we're doing. We have a legal manager in our business. We never had one of those before.
Right. Right.
And
so that's a change.
It's understanding your blind spots. And I don't know necessarily where all of my weaknesses are, only 19, 20 years into this business, or 17, 18 years into this business. And so I've now, when I think about someone, if they're too similar to me, or they say too many yeses, or they're too much seeking approval, to me, they're going to get kicked to the curb. And I get it.
Yeah.
We were talking about credit decisions, how you make as a business. If the CEO says yes, who's going to put their neck on the line?
Right. And, I agree.
And he shared with me, in the military, you go in reverse order of rank. So the most junior person, on up to the senior person. Yeah. Otherwise, you will get the same viewpoint, because once the CEO opens his mouth, it's over.
It's over.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's funny, even on a call this morning, one of my underwriters asked me a question. I said, nope. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, you're answering first.
What do you think? Answer first. Yeah.
Right. Because she's seen the information. She's seen the data. She's talked to the client. Her opinion is better informed than mine is.
Yeah. Yeah. But then you can take your leadership and take that opinion and give her feedback and things like that, where you wouldn't have gotten that opinion. Yeah, I totally agree. That it's such an interesting change, I bet, to your philosophy on how you approach business and all that.
But now it's with everything, right?
Yeah, now it's everything.
Face value, I take so much less at face value. But you asked me a question of how do you not get jaded? And the answer is I don't know. Because there are probably some things that I'm always going to be jaded on from now into eternity. And I don't know if that's a bad thing, as long as I'm not jaded on life and as long as I'm not jaded on everything.
Yeah. And I think another way of repackaging that, I was listening to what you were saying, that maybe it's impossible not to become jaded, but the art of life maybe is how you either push back or react to being jaded, right? Like just because you're jaded now does not mean you have to be jaded forever. Does not mean you have to approach every situation being jaded. And I think that's where the paths diverge. Somebody has a really tough time in life and gets jaded and can't find their way out of that, or can't push back against it, becomes a real tough situation. Whereas if somebody can approach it and go, you know what, I'm just going to accept the fact that my outlook on life, whether it be business or family, maybe I'm jaded in a couple of ways, but I recognize that. And because of that, I'm going to do these things to address that, which I think is probably the art of managing being jaded versus not becoming it all.
And it's interesting, when I feel myself the most negative about something is, instead of just closing the conversation, that's when I start asking more questions.
Yeah,
because I'm trying to get more inputs to see if my reaction is, I had a bad experience with a printing company 10 years ago, or if this printing company is a bad printing company.
Exactly.
And every single person I've ever mentored or ever really spoken with is I've recommended them one very simple book. And it's not a simple book. Michael Lewis, The Undoing Project.
Mm-hmm.
He follows
Fantastic
two
book.
Israeli behavioral economists about biases and heuristics and how we go about making decisions. And as soon as you've read that book, and there's another one Daniel Kahneman wrote, who I think won a Nobel Prize. And
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Exactly right. And so if you really want to get into the weeds with Ryan and I, but it's so often, and one of the ones I love the most is this availability, right? Which is when you ask someone's name, they're going to recall the most vivid, the worst thing that's ever happened to them, like a lawsuit, or you might remember their most recent experience with said person.
Yeah.
It's why in business development, they give 3 names, and the most 3 names of people they've recently spoken to, because people are lazy. Yeah. Just by nature, right? It's easier.
The brain technically.
The brain is lazy, people. Yeah. The brain is lazy, right? It just wants to, here you go. Here's your easy answer. Yeah. Don't use me for higher functions. Or now it's like, no, I want to know the higher function, right? I want to know, 12 data points in this person. I don't want to know just one. And even when someone now asks my opinion, I will share with them, I've really only had a limited window. And so I think you should take it with a grain of salt, because I know that if I say it because of this in our industry, I could be absolutely ruining someone's career forever. And so to me, I don't endorse as strongly unless I feel like I can, but I don't
or as
want
freely,
to be
even
as freely or as negatively, particularly if I only have a few little experiences, right? Of like,
totally,
I've heard in the industry that is complete bullshit.
That's bullshit.
It means nothing. But so many people then share it and share it and share it.
Me,
and now
me
that's your
too.
reputation.
I'm gonna admit that too. Like, there are times, not just in our industry, but it's like, oh, I heard this one thing about this person, and now I've made this unabashed claim or opinion about them forever. And it's just like that. As you get older, you and I are getting there. You learn that there are so many different types of people. There are, in one person, there are multiple types of people. There's different outcomes with those people, different interactions with those people. So yeah, very, very interesting. And I love the idea of the heuristics and your decision-making process, because that was one of my questions as well. But we're running out of time. So
one little thing, the negative impulse matters more than the positive impulse.
Agreed. Expand.
Where if in credit, if this person, happened to do something 10 years ago, they could have done nothing in the last 9 years, but that one negative input then has this lens change, and the person could just never like this deal or this person ever again. And that's why we discount positives and overvalue negatives at really weird times in decision making too. Anyways.
Totally. No, I agree. I agree with that. It's the same reason, for every negative comment you get from somebody, you need like 10 compliments to even it out. It's just the way our brains want to work. But let's move on to the positive part of it. So moving forward here, you guys just recently had an incredibly successful exit as a company after everything was settled. We don't have to talk about the whole settlement or anything like that, but in fact, it was a different bank, and I would argue, I guess I don't know, but sounds like an even better outcome for everybody. So what hindsight wisdom from that process do you have now that you've come through the other side?
When you are planning the strategy of your business, you, again, as rudimentary as Porter's 5 forces, right? Understand the bargaining power of suppliers, understanding the bargaining power of customers, understanding incumbents, entrants, existing, etc., right? And the reason I mention that is our business, strategically, for my business partner and I, is when we look at the world in the future, whether it's this case or not, we look at wanting to be able to do slightly better credit things. But in order to do a better credit deal, you need lower cost of pricing to have a margin that makes sense, right? Just arbitrage is what commercial finance companies are, right? We borrow money at X, we lend it at Y. The higher your borrowing costs, generally the more you need to charge a customer, which then sends you to riskier credits, right?
Correct.
So strategically, when my business partner and I view the world, we didn't think, particularly going into a recession, particularly where we were, that now was the time to go riskier and in search of yield. And so for us, partnering with a bank that is over $17 billion in assets with a strategic footprint, 150 in a region that we weren't in at all, added value if we did nothing else than what we do today. And sure enough, we've got 5 or 6 deals we're going to close now in the next month from this bank, right? So that is business we otherwise would not have had. But more importantly, Stuart and I almost lost the business. And what it did show to us was, at times, entrepreneurship is amazing, and we wouldn't trade it at all. I wouldn't trade a single experience, but our industry dynamics were changing in a way that when you paired it with our strategy, it meant cost of funds was going to be king, and working with people that could invest and support where you needed to go in the long run. And continuing to have to rely on debt-based partners as opposed to a true equity partner was a different ballgame, right? And so from our end, we wanted someone that didn't solve today. We wanted someone that was going to be a good partner for the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. And I will tell you, the CEO of the firm that acquired us called me the day before closing with one only message. We believe in you. We believe in Republic, and we can't wait to partner with you going forward. There's going to be a couple bumps. Here's my cell phone. But fundamentally, this wasn't by accident. We can't wait to see what we can do together. He has 2,500 employees. He didn't need to make that phone call. But he's been there for 44 years. The business that bought us has been around since 1904. And they viewed us like we viewed them, as better together than we are apart. And when I look at our industry dynamics and we look at this story 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years from now, I think you can build a better business that is ultimately worth more with a partner that doesn't have some of the same capital constraints that then might cause you to make some bad strategic or some bad tactical choices over a given deal, right? Like today, let's add businesses that make sense. There's no pressure to grow. I don't have debt coupons we have to hit. I don't have some covenant that's going to get in the way of us being able to run our business. Now we have a partner, right? And it doesn't have to be a bank. It could be all kinds of other different versions.
When you think about it, talk about, relating it to other people's businesses, because I would argue most of our listeners aren't in commercial finance at this point. So
there's enough of us in this space already, and I don't. This is a hard one.
But I think your lesson there is that a partner. I think there's entrepreneurs can sometimes have a badge of honor of going it solo, of not having a partner, of trying to hold out for more money, let's say. And really it sounds way more critical to have the partner that can provide you the lifestyle and the business that you want going forward. And obviously you guys were thoughtful enough to think through what that actually meant. And I think the lesson for people is that in the moment it can look so scary, but you have no idea where the branch of that tree is going to grow out to. and what that outcome is going to be. So there's got to be some release and some letting go of, I'm not in control of this. I can point the boat in the right direction, but I can't force the water to go the way it's going to go. You know?
Yeah. And I'd add on to that. There's different evolutions of a business. When we were X and then we became 4X, the capital markets change. And at that size, we were one of the largest independent finance companies in the country that were owned by the people that actually managed it.
Mm-hmm.
What happens at that time is the capital markets people are different. They want board seats or they want some equity. Where we had the three of us, whether you wanted to own that lawsuit or not, owned 100% of the business, right? And two of us ran the business and the other was a family friend. And when you're in that spot, I'm 39 years old. The plan was not to do this, right? We went out, we decided to use an investment banker and make some strategic chats about raising debt, right? It wasn't until later, and frankly, very end, where it made sense to explore more of a strategic sale. And it came down to people first, right? And to me, and my business partner always says this, money has a personality, right? And I could have gotten better terms or more money or something.
For sure.
But, there's a firm called Cerberus, right? And they weren't involved in our process, which is why I can use them. They're just an example. But it is the three-headed dog that guards the gates to hell. Okay? If I had done a deal with Cerberus, and the person I did a deal with wasn't going to be there 3 to 5 years later, or was going to be promoted, or was going to be doing something else. And so it was a transaction.
Yeah.
When we looked at this, we found a partner, right? The CEO has been there for 44 years.
That's pretty incredible.
And that mattered a ton, considering this is only my second job. And this is only the first company I've owned.
Right.
I'm not ready to be done. I think, and I've said this a lot, is we're just getting started. Yeah, I don't own it anymore.
Yeah.
But I think our business is better in today's structure than it was 4 or 5 months ago. And it's because it's where we go is our choice. We don't have some of the constraints that you do generally have as entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship's not for anyone, right? If we'd have found someone that were a bunch of jerks, this would be miserable and we'd be telling a whole different story. But again, you go back to being very thoughtful and running a process and having a lot of conversations. We had a really good idea of what made sense for us before we had the conversations.
So what excites you most about this next chapter then? Just kind of wrapping up this long, beautiful conversation about the challenges of life. What excites you most about the next chapter of your life? I have
a 4-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and my third kid is due on May 17th, which depending on the recording,
good thing we did this podcast,
which is for everyone at home, 13 days from now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what excites me the most is now 100% of my time is spent on my family, on my business, and on myself. I have lost hours and hours a day worried about the balance sheet of our business, managing debt stakeholders, managing investors, managing raising money, right? Because in our business, every 3 to 5 years, you're raising more capital in one form or another to keep, especially if you're growing. And to me, while that wasn't fun and that wasn't learning, I was tired of it. I was much more interested in who we were, where we were going, and what we could do. And caring what my cost of capital was just, it was an intellectual exercise that added no value to the business.
Right.
And
it's draining.
I'm glad I'm not sitting around big, giant marble conference room tables anymore, frankly, right? I'm glad I get to just sit down with either prospective clients or current clients and talk about what we're going to do together. And to me, that's
record a podcast. Or record a podcast too. You wouldn't have had time for this before. So, well, this has been fun. We're down to our last questions. They're called the Fast Four. These you're meant to not think about and just answer as quickly as you can. So I'm going to go through them real quick here. Other than what you're doing right now, what other profession or business would you like to take a stab at?
I'd be a teacher.
Teacher. God, that sounds awful. But
without question.
What a nice. Wait. What age group?
Probably college. And it'd be probably entrepreneurial finance course. My wife was a teacher for 14 years and she taught middle school. Couldn't do it.
No thanks.
Couldn't do it. So much respect
thanks.
for teachers, but I love that. Even the part of business, I just love talking to people, spending time with them, and then seeing what they can go do on their own.
On their own. Yeah. Well, hopefully University of Chicago's listening. All right. Next, what's something you're terrible at?
Patience. Patience wise. My wife will tell you I'm patient, but in business, wasted days, wasted hours to me where we could have done something, eat at me a little bit every day, even though that day may not matter. It just eats at me a little bit. Yeah. The lack of sense of urgency just eats at me. It just bothers me. Just
kills you. Yeah.
And I know that day doesn't matter.
Yeah. And patience is an art. Honestly, we need to be more patient. So that is something that would make you terrible. What book or what book are you reading, or what documentary have you recently watched that you like a lot?
Man, I really wait till my kids get older and I can go back to reading books again.
You'll get there.
I've had a book called Head or Tails sitting on my nightstand for the better part of 1.5 years or 2 years. And it's about a family that sets off sail. One boat takes them to the US and one boat takes them to London. And I've gotten 10 chapters into it 3 different times and never been able to get through it. I'm going to get through that book when I have time. But instead, I've been reading a lot of news and other stuff. And I now need to go spend some time with Chat GTP, which it's going to take me hours and hours and days.
I know,
I really loved reading. And that's the book that I've unfortunately not finished. There's an uncorked book about Napa wine too. That's right below that book. Over my next 2 books I'll be reading.
Cool. Well, I don't know if you saw our Thursday 13, but maybe next quarter I'll have you on and we'll do your reading list if we can get you back to reading here shortly. All right. Last question. What's the last thing you listened to on Spotify or Apple Music? You can look at your phone if you need to. The last thing. Oh, it's funny. We share a Spotify account. This one could be pretty funny. Yeah.
So we went to Good Times, Great Oldies Spotify playlist was the last thing I read.
Good Times, Great
However,
Oldies.
if you ask me what the last thing the Meyers family did, we created a playlist of kids' books read aloud. So like Peter the Rabbit was actually the last thing that my family Spotify account listened to.
There we go. Okay.
And that's because sometimes it helps them calm down. It's like a 20, 30-minute storyteller is what it's called. But it was actually the last thing I listened to, but I wasn't there for that.
Love it. All right. Well, Rob, thank you for spending some time with us today. And frankly, I've heard the story before in some way, shapes, or form, but I did learn some stuff today, and I appreciate you being open and honest with me and with our listeners. I think they'll get huge value not only from the hard-earned wisdom of that situation, but just I think sometimes just hearing another person going through some shit helps people get through some shit. So thank you for doing that. Where can people find you guys online and get in touch?
Yeah. So republicbc.com, LinkedIn, Robert Meyers. And it's interesting. There's one question I didn't share with you that I had to ask repeatedly during this process. And it's a scary question, but what's the worst thing that could happen?
Right.
And I had to ask that of lawyers on a regular basis. If you were representing the other side, what's the worst thing you could do to me? That question helped tremendously with my expectations of what the awful things were. But
love it.
republicbc.com, LinkedIn, Robert Meyers, Secured Finance Network, Turnaround Management Association, all those things Brian mentioned will be all over the place. I wouldn't be doing my job if you couldn't find me. But hey, thanks for listening to the story. Right. And if you take one nugget from it, that would be super cool and make it worth it. So thanks, Ryan.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate your time. Thanks, Rob. Take care.